We could start this video by telling you how many tons of CO2 is released into the atmosphere every hour, or how much plastic goes into the ocean every minute. But when we hear numbers like these over and over again without any frame of reference, they start to lose meaning. So let's cut to the chase and look at which industries are the biggest polluters, and where possible, point out a few practical solutions. Keep in mind, there's no cut and dry way of comparing one industry to another when it comes to how much they pollute, partly because there are such big overlaps between them. One industry relies on another and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. That's why this list isn't in any particular order, but we've managed to choose not one, but two industries that we think are the biggest polluters of them all. Of course, we'll explain why we think that, and we'll save those till last. Number 1. Agriculture. Farming serves one of our most basic needs, which means we can't live without it. But with the world's population rising, can the world handle our food needs? For the time being, probably yes, but with a big caveat. Not when we're eating as much meat as we are right now. Agriculture accounts for around 15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and more than half of that comes from cattle production. And when we're talking about raising cows, there are some big problems at every link of the chain, from manufacturing fertilizers for cattle feed to burning forests to make way for grazing land. It all means that gram for gram of protein, beef production takes up 20 times more land and causes 20 times more carbon emissions than beans, and 10 times more than chicken. So if you give up beef and go plant-based, you're doing the planet a big favor, and even replacing beef with chicken is a big improvement. Number 2. Food retail. This one's not about growing food. We're talking about how it's packaged, transported, and sold, and how much of it ends up getting wasted. The amount of packaging isn't only ginormous, it's also totally unnecessary too. Nearly 1 million tons of plastic is used in food retail every year. That goes into landfills or oceans where it kills hundreds of thousands of marine animals. Solutions? You've heard most of them before. Use reusable shopping bags. Go to sustainable supermarkets that have no or very little packaging. And packaging aside, avoid wasting food, as that's another huge problem. And just taking a quick break. Remember, here at Alux, we cover a lot of the most relevant issues, from everything like boosting your productivity or your career to problems like the ones we're talking about right now. So if you're not subscribed, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button for more quality content every day. Number 3. Passenger transport. This one accounts for 1/5 of all CO2 emissions, and even though the travel has slowed down in the pandemic, the general trend is upwards. Between 2010 and 2019, the number of flights we made went up by 40%. Now you're probably thinking planes are the main culprit here, but get ready to be surprised. Air travel only accounts for 16% of all of this. Land-based travel pollutes a lot more. Either way, it's still good to limit your plane journeys. Carpool, take public transport, and go for an electric car, especially now that they're becoming more available. Number 4. Commercial freight. The other side of transport, not carrying people, but carrying the stuff we buy. Over the pandemic, we've all been ordering more online and getting it delivered to our homes, whether that's dinner or something that's been flown halfway across the world. It's not that we weren't already doing it, but just that we're doing it even more. And of course, most commercial freight isn't addressed to individuals, but companies. All told, commercial freight doesn't pollute as much as passenger transport, but still a lot. Around 40% of all CO2 emissions from transport. Number 5. Tourism. According to carbonbrief.org, tourism is responsible for 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it's true that a lot of this is included in other figures here, like passenger transport, but there's a whole load of other factors to remember when we're talking about how tourism pollutes. Like cheap, tacky plastic souvenirs that soon go in the trash. Yep, that's a load more plastic to clog up the oceans and landfills. And we all like to be spoiled in a plush hotel or restaurant. But a lot of food is wasted in restaurants, and when hotels wash our towels every day, that's not exactly efficient energy use. And guess what? It all adds up to more pollution. Number 6. Construction. Now to an industry that ranks high in pretty much every kind of pollution imaginable. All the building sites around the world add up to 23% of air pollution. Harmful dust ends up in tap water and accounts for 40% of drinking water pollution. And the construction industry produces around half the garbage that ends up in a landfill. Let's also give a mention to the world's most ignored kind of pollution: noise pollution. You don't need a PhD in environmental sciences to figure out that construction is a huge offender of that one too. And we haven't even gotten to the raw materials it uses. Around half of all natural resource extraction, a sixth of global fresh water, a quarter of wood, and it produces a quarter of global waste. Number 7. Natural gas. We've often thought of natural gas as the friendlier cousin of all the fossil fuels, which is kinda true, but given the company it's in, it's really not saying much. In 2019, natural gas was responsible for 8 billion tons of CO2 that went into the atmosphere. That's about a fifth of the total carbon emissions, and includes 500 million tons from flaring when gas gets burned during processing. And speaking of fossil fuels like coal and gas, don't worry, we're getting to those later. Number 8. Fashion. Like any industry, fashion uses energy to make stuff, and a lot of it. The clothes we wear use enough energy to account for 10% of all carbon emissions. But what pushes fashion even further up the list of polluters is the amount of clothes that get dumped every year. Of course, the world of fashion has a lot of different types of players involved, and there's one section of it we can really point our fingers at: fast fashion. That's because fast fashion items are made up of cheap material that doesn't last long. Worse still, they often contain harmful microplastics and tend to be made in lower-income countries with worse environmental regulations, where factories are more likely to run on coal and gas. And when all of that energy's gone into making fast fashion, 85% of textiles get dumped every year. What can we do about it? Don't be fooled by fast fashion. At Alux, we've often said, buy quality that will last and don't look passé in a year or two. Also, buy secondhand clothing and sell or recycle yours instead of just binning them. Number 9. Chemical manufacturing. Every kind of manufacturing uses energy, and a lot of it dirty energy, but it just happens that the chemicals industry is the biggest industrial user of energy by a long shot. That means the cleaning products we use at home, pesticides farmers put on their crops, or construction materials builders use all took their toll on the environment even before they were used. And besides that, the chemicals industry releases toxic substances into the environment, which contaminates the water, soil, air, and food. Worst of all is in lower-income countries where there are fewer regulations to protect things. Number 10. The plastics industry. When it comes to plastic, over 8 billion tons of it have been produced, and only 9% of that have been recycled. We're sure you've seen photos of clogged up beaches or islands of it in the middle of the ocean, killing sea animals from small fish to whales, so it's no need to explain where a lot of it ends up. The good news is it will decompose. The bad news, it'll take hundreds of years to do that. So a good solution is the same for a lot of environmental problems. Consume less, especially when it contains plastic and you know it's going to end up in the trash sometime soon. Reuse and recycle as much as possible. Number 11. Waste management. Here are a couple of figures for you. The average American produces around a ton of garbage every year, which means there's a big market in getting rid of it. So it shouldn't come as much of a surprise the global waste management industry is currently worth $2 trillion. And to be fair, when you think about how much waste they have to deal with, doing it in a way that's clean is an impossible job. Still, when you look at the facts, they sure make it onto the list of the most polluting industries. We've already talked about plastic in the seas. What about garbage in landfill sites? That's where about half of our trash ends up, and when harmful chemicals come out of it, they end up poisoning the land around it and the groundwater, and it creates health problems, from asthma to cancer, even birth defects. Number 12. Mining. Minerals and metals that come from the ground may be useful, even pretty, but it's a fact that getting them out of the ground doesn't do any favors for the natural surroundings where we can find them. And it's not just a case of ruining the view. Mining can lead to a whole load of problems, like soil erosion and sinkholes, destruction of forests. Yep, that's bad news for carbon emissions and biodiversity, as well as harmful substances like arsenic, mercury, and sulfuric acid getting into the soil and the water beneath it, which ends up in rivers taps and in people's faucets. It kills wildlife and destroys ecosystems. Number 13. Technology. We're talking about a huge sector, and it's true that this one's very two-edged. We've got to give the tech industry credit for revolutionizing energy with solar power and other renewables, and it's giving us ways to recycle plastics and solutions to plenty of other environmental problems. But there are serious downsides too, like the amount of energy tech products use. Currently, around 3% of the world's electricity goes into powering our servers and charging our devices. Those figures are going up every year, and for as long as the world still relies on fossil fuels, that's a problem. On top of that, phones and computers use rare minerals that cause environmental destruction when they're mined, like coltan, a metallic ore mined mostly in Central Africa, polluting lakes and rivers, and we need it to make phones, tablets, and computers. So, now we're getting toward the end of our list. Remember, this isn't a countdown, but there are two industries that we think are by far the worst polluters, and we've saved them for last in reverse order. The second worst polluter is number 14, oil. No surprises here to see this is near the top of our list. It's a fact that oil is a huge polluter, as well as being behind climate change. Oil companies pollute areas where they drill, and they pollute the world's seas and oceans through oil spillages. In 2020, 1,000 tons of oil were spilled worldwide. But the biggest reason for oil being so close to the top of our list is the amount of carbon dioxide it sends out into the atmosphere. Currently, 12.25 billion tons, 34% of the world's carbon emissions. But as bad a rap as oil gets, which is deserved, it's still not the world's number one polluter. That dubious honor goes to number 15, coal. Finally, we've come to the worst of the worst, the global industry that contributes more to global warming than any other, coal. It emits more CO2 than any other fossil fuel when it's burned, the biggest contributor to CO2 in the atmosphere, as well as producing methane, a greenhouse gas that has 25 more global warming potential than CO2. Even though a lot of countries are phasing it out, 27% of the world's energy supply comes from coal. In places where it's burned, it causes smog, which leads to serious health conditions from respiratory problems to heart disease. This is a big concern in China, which still uses coal for around 60% of its energy, as well as other countries including India and Poland. And yes, coal does release more CO2 into the atmosphere than oil, 14.62 billion tons, or 40% of all CO2 emissions, which is why it's sitting here at the top of our list. So, Aluxers, here's a question for you. We already mentioned a few things we can do to reduce pollution. What other ideas do you have to do our part to stop polluting? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Now, you stuck with us until the end, of course, you're getting a bonus. Cryptocurrencies. Surprised to see this one here? Well, even if you're a big fan of crypto, there's no ignoring the fact it's come under fire for being a big polluter. The reason? The amount of energy it takes to make a transaction, or worse still, to mine it, using networks of high-powered supercomputers. It's been claimed that crypto uses 0.4% of all electricity consumption. That's nowhere near chemicals, tourism, or fashion, but still significant. And if crypto grows at the rate a lot of us are expecting it to, and we don't make a fast switch to cleaner energy, it's going to get worse. And the counter-argument from the crypto and blockchain community is the idea behind crypto is it works for a better future for us all, where the main focus is literally eliminating waste. Feel free to tell us what you think in the comments. Thanks for joining us today, Aluxers. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and hit subscribe if you haven't already.